Hey there, Heather. Hello there. It's Jeff Cutter Down. Welcome you to yet another Cutter Top 10 video. And today we're going to be looking at the top 10 emotional NHL moments of all time. Something that will make you go, not that necessary. So, anyway, we've had some fantastic moments in hockey, and there's a lot of things and all that. So, here we go. Number 10 is the double whammy in Buffalo in 1989 and 2008. Both times the city of Buffalo hosted a match that saw a player get sliced in the neck. Of course, I should have prefaced it with a few descriptions of eyes thing. But anyway, Richard Sednick and Clint Malarchuk both had the misfortune while playing in Buffalo as a get injured. Clint Malarchuk was hit by Steve Tuttle's skate in 1989 and gushed heavily. Fortunately, Buffalo trainer Jim Petroselli, who was working in B&M during the war, could pinch off the nerve and make sure that nothing else happened. Malarchuk, after 11 days, made a recovery. Unfortunately, he was not the same goalie, and it's also known that if he was at the other side of the Buffalo Auditorium, then the Sabres, then he would have been dead duck because the Sabres training room was on the other side of the rink. However, Richard Sednick in 2008 got in for escape from a teammate. But thankfully, thanks to the training sessions and all that, the Buffalo trainer saved his life. Number 9 is St. Louis winning the Stanley Cup for Leah Anderson. The St. Louis Blues were last placed by New Year's Day 2019. And look back, Craig Berube became the new coach. Jordan Binghamton remembered who the heck he was as a St. Louis prospect. And the Blues somehow, in some way, shocked the world and got to the finals against those pesky big bad Bruins. In a Game 7, St. Louis won in Boston and won the Cup. And it also helped that 13-year-old Leah Anderson was a key figure too, as she was fighting cancer and all that and beat it. And her shaved head, because of the chemo thing, was actually a transcending moment. And it didn't hurt that the Blues, for the first time since their inception in 1967, won the Cup. But that's just me. Number 8 is Locomotive 2011. It has to be one of the most devastating moments in NHL history. Well, you're thinking, well, that can't be NHL history. It happened in Russia. Well, due to the fact that many players on the Locomotive team in the KHL actually played for the NHL or actually was an NHL prospect or was going to be in the NHL, you have that match. Only 2 people survived the Locomotive crash of September 7, 2011, which will always be in everyone's hearts and hockey fans. Legends like Igor Korolev, Pavel Dimitra, Alex Karpovtsev, Brad McCrimmon, Stefan Leave, and of course, the biggest victim I thought, Pavel Dimitra. So it was just shocking that many NHL franchises lost some key members and all that. Number 7 is Paul Kariya coming back from being on the floor on the board, 2003. The Ducks shocked everyone by making the Stanley Cup Finals in 2003 as they had to take out the defending Stanley Cup champion Detroit Red Wings in a sweep. Then they fought Dallas off and then played Minnesota in the Battle of the Underdogs. And I took care of New Jersey. Every game had the home team win in 2003. Paul Kariya in Game 6 was knocked unconscious by Scott Stevens, who was known for his hits that knocked out people. Eric Lindros, anybody? But anyway, Kariya somehow was laying down on the ice. And then, with concussion protocols not happening as they do today, Paul Kariya got up and then minutes later, late in the second period, he stepped in to went over Bridger's shoulder. And Gary Thorne's call off the floor, on the board, Paul Kariya will always be a soundbite. The Ducks won Game 6, but lost Game 7 at the Swamp. Number 6 is Rocket Richard's ovation in 1996. So it was just amazing and all that. Rocket Richard was Montreal defined because his leadership brought Quebec from the depths of being a second class citizens to ruling Quebec in a sense. It was called the Quiet Revolution. His 1955 suspension by President Clarence Campbell was seen as an insult to French people, even though that Rocket Richard had too many suspensions on his record in the first place. Anyhow, it was the final game of the Montreal Four, March 11th, 1996. You hold it on a Monday? Really? You couldn't just hold it on a Saturday and then the next Saturday you start in a new arena? Kind of like what the Leafs did. But anyway, yeah, they brought back a lot of Montreal Canadian icons. Serge Savard would have been reunited with Guy Lapointe and Larry Robinson, but Larry Robinson, was working for the Devils and all that. You had Ken Dryden, you had Vladislav Tretiak being honored, you had the Pocket Rocket honored Richard, you had Jean Beliveau, you had Guy Lafleur. It was a massive cornucopia of who's who. And of course, the last guy was Rocket Richard and got a 10-minute standing ovation. That is still powerful to this day. Number 5 is Patrice Bergeron scoring a goal in the first game after the Boston Marathon tragedy 2013. Even though it was not a hockey moment per se, because the Boston Marathon is a running event, which is held on Patriots Day. I think it's the third Monday in April. But anyway, yeah, it was amazing. But then at 2:30 in the afternoon, a pressure cooker bomb exploded, killing people, giving people lost limbs, and a lot of other things too. Boston was struggling. The Red Sox had to cancel games. The Bruins canceled the critical game against Ottawa. Many people, their hearts were out for Boston, even though they hated Boston sometimes. However, NBC decided to broadcast the first Boston home game after the bombing live. And it was just powerful. Renee Rancourt's U.S. national anthem was very stirring and all that. And Boston's strong. And David Ortiz said this is the best fucking place in the land. But Bergeron scored that overtime goal and lifted Boston up. Who would have thought that the whole Boston tragedy actually helped Boston get to the Stanley Cup Finals? It would have been amazing if they won the championship, but they didn't. It was Chicago. But still, I mean, Boston to come up from the ashes, especially with the World Series team. It was amazing. Number 4 is Ray Bourque winning the Stanley Cup in 2001. It was an amazing moment. Where am I on? Yeah, that's number 4. Okay, yeah, number 4. And, Ray Bourque was just great and all that. Boston had him as one of the best defensemen, if not the best defenseman in the team history. Eddie Sharp, eat your heart out. But Ray Bourque transcended things. Boston made it to 3 finals under his watch. Unfortunately, they couldn't win. So, unfortunately, what could you do? Boston decided to do the smart thing and trade him to a cup contender so that they can give him the cup, and while Boston would be behind him. So the trade to Colorado happened, and the Avalanche won the Stanley Cup in 2001. Although it wasn't easy, they won in Games 6 and 7 to take care of the Devils. And of course, Ray Bourque lifting the cup was just amazing. And Gary Ford really captured the moment when he said, after 22 years, Raymond Bourque. And then he finally won the Stanley Cup. Well, Joe Sakic would have raised it over his head, but gave Ray Bourque the honor of doing so. And that was big for Colorado to do it and retire on top. Number 3 is the Humboldt bus crash of 2018. It was a serene April weekend in 2018. The Masters was playing. Hockey was starting to wrap up. And probably think about how bad the Toronto Blue Jays would be. But yeah, Humboldt, in the middle of the night, on a Friday night in 2018, a uncertified bus driver made a massive crash with a vehicle, killing pretty much 70% of the team. Humboldt was just humbled, to say the least. Pun not really intended, but it happened. So the hockey community was just, grief stricken. I mean, teams across the NHL would wear green ribbons, heartfelt tributes, moments of silence, and, Chicago and Winnipeg, especially in 2018 when they were in Winnipeg. That scene of both teams standing around the center ice circle. It was just amazing. And for weeks, people in Canada would leave their sticks out as a sign of solidarity. But yeah, it was just amazing. You know, it reminded people of 1989, 1986 when the Swift Current Broncos had a massive crash that killed 4 people. Joe Sakic was on that team, and he paid tribute to them. Number 2 is Wayne Gretzky's final game. I know some say that should be number 1, but I mean, number 1 is number 1 for a reason. But anyway, Wayne Gretzky was a big guy coming in from the WHA in 1979 from Indy to Edmonton, and then Edmonton signed him to a personal services contract. He was the face of the Oilers, and then Peter Pocklington decided to sell Gretzky because he was losing money hand and foot. In Los Angeles, with Bruce McNall got him. It was the massive deal that sent Jimmy Carson back to Edmonton, but he acted like a spoiled teenager and forced a trade to Detroit. And Gretzky allowed Martin McSorley to come to LA with him, and Gretzky almost pulled off a mea culpa and dropped the trade, but he knew he was in too deep and all that. Yeah, it didn't help that, people told Walter Gretzky this. Gretzky would play for LA for 7 years, and then they traded him to St. Louis to try to get him the cup, but the Blues were terrible, and then the Rangers signed him to free agency. Gretzky and Messier were back together, and they had one golden season, 97, that saw the Rangers make the conference finals, but then Messier shifted off to Vancouver. And Gretzky did say he would not have gone to New York if he knew that Messier was going to leave. Of course, Toronto always had him, but Steve Stavros said, how many seats will that add to us in the stands, which were 0? Anyway, Wayne Gretzky decided up until the second last game of the season in Ottawa to announce his retirement. So yeah, his retirement happened. Ottawa gave him a big salute, and then the Rangers at home against Pittsburgh gave a big salute. It was massive. Gary Yager scored the overtime goal to send Pittsburgh to the win over the Rangers, but it was passing the torch, or well, should have been. Gretzky then skated all by himself, and the fans in New York were just, gratitude. And number 1 is Mario Lemieux coming back from non-Hodgkin lymphoma in 1993. Mario Lemieux was an iconic player for the Pittsburgh Penguins, the first overall pick in 1984, refused to put the shirt on during the draft, mostly because of contract negotiations. And he seemed to be a pretty good player and all that. He helped Pittsburgh get out of bankruptcy and into a couple of Stanley Cup banners. But in 1993, he found out he had Hodgkin's lymphoma, which was some type of cancer. So he needed to take radiation treatments, and of course, obviously, it would take a couple months off the NBA season, the NHL season. What am I thinking, NBA? Pittsburgh was okay, but then when he came back on March 2nd, 1993, in Philadelphia, he had a goal and an assist. And the Philly fans even gave him a standing ovation, which you never see. But what makes this even more emotional and huge was the fact that Mario Lemieux would be like what, third in the scoring race, but the guy freaking pulled it together, won the scoring title by 12 points, and he missed like 2 months of the season, and he still won the scoring title. There was no doubt he was going to win the Hart for MVP, but like the guy freaking pulled it off, and it would have been a massive Cinderella story to see him win the Stanley Cup. But unfortunately, those pesky New York Islanders ruined them. But still, I mean, Mario Lemieux coming back from cancer. Coming back from cancer is not that easy in any field, much less hockey. So that's all I've got for this video. I'm Jeff Diamond. Adieu.